Hello. Sorry about that. The recording kicked in a little bit late. As I mentioned, I've been with the Diagram Center now for about 4 years. So I'm really excited to both give everyone on this webinar today a little bit of retrospective on where we've been, but then spend a whole lot of time on where we're going, because I think that's why we're here, and we're all very excited to be embarking on the next phase of the Diagram Center. So first, I wanted to start with a little bit of background so there's some context. I know that there are folks who are attending the webinar today who may not know very much about Benetech. So I'm just providing a little bit of context on Benetech. We are a nonprofit technology company, again, based here in Palo Alto, California, whose mission is to empower communities in need by creating scalable technology solutions. Our largest program is our Global Literacy Program. And many of you may know Global Literacy through our flagship product, which is Bookshare. And Bookshare is the world's largest library of accessible ebooks for people with print disabilities. Through funding from the Department of Education, it is the content of Bookshare is made freely available to students in the United States with qualifying disabilities. And we now serve more than 400,000 people around the world, the vast majority of whom are U.S. students, with more than 400,000 books. So it is our largest program. And it's really because we have run Bookshare for so long and have really spent a lot of time in the trenches working with accessible content and delivering accessible content. In many ways, much of the work that we've done there is inspiration for the Diagram Center. Part of the mission of Bookshare really is about getting content to people with disabilities as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. And so one of the ways that one of our missions is really to emphasize what we call born accessible, which is to say that in many cases, Bookshare may not even be necessary in the future because we would much rather that content that is published by publishers, especially in the educational sector, be made accessible to all, regardless of disability, at the get-go. When content is created digitally, we are at a time and place where it should be also created accessibly. So that Born Accessible mission is a key part of our Global Literacy Program. And then finally, to the foundation of the technology work that we're doing for Born Accessible is really where the Diagram Center comes in, which is trying to find the best pathways to accessibility through technology that we can, as a community, research and develop and then spread the word on so that content can be made accessible to students. So that's just a little bit of a high overview of the various initiatives within Benetech's Global Literacy Program, and you can see where the work that we do really contributes and creates an ecosystem of effort around accessible content. So very specifically, now I'm going to turn my attention to Diagram Center itself. So very specifically, the Diagram Center really came out of the work that we were doing looking at complex materials largely for STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In many cases, STEM content is conveyed not via text, but via complex images. And we have here a slide there. It just has a compilation of some various complex images, some graphs, some chemical diagrams, a chart that exhibits the process of meiosis, another one, and then another graphic that displays a chloroplast stroma and all its components. These kinds of diagrams are incredibly important in STEM content, as you can imagine, but also incredibly complex and difficult to convey, and trying to find a way to make them more accessible, particularly to students who don't have visual access to that visual information, was part of the initial drive. But it wasn't just images that concerned us. So now I'm looking at a collage of symbolic notation. One of the things that we found, of course, is that when you're looking at a digital textbook, when you're reading a digital textbook, text can be fairly reliably conveyed with a screen reader, for instance, but images, but math and symbolic notation, because of the challenges of the typography, publishers would often rely on images to convey that math and symbolic notation. It's simply easier to control the typography, control the look, and spacing and placement of symbolic notation. So we quickly also needed to address that issue as well. So we're looking not just at images that have graphs and charts and diagrams, but then also at math. And of course, now students are looking at more than just textbooks and looking at more than just flat web pages with images of math or images of diagrams and charts and graphs. They're now also engaging with multimedia, such as video. And I've got here an image that is a screen capture from a Khan Academy video on mitosis. And the instructor has drawn out the phases of mitosis and is lecturing as he draws. And as you can imagine, that requires its own special set of processes to make accessible. And then, of course, we're very aware that multimedia is also often interactive. So I've got an image here of a simulation of Faraday's law, which comes from the PhET initiative at Colorado, which is an online simulation that students can use to take a magnet and move it in and out of some coils in order to produce voltage. And that's all done online. So now it's a question of how do you take something like that's an online interactive or a game and make that accessible as well. And of course, we are very conscious that there's a world beyond those technologies which are happening in the classroom now. I've got an image here of a child using a virtual reality headset to play the piano. And we are hearing more and more about the exploration of these new technologies like virtual reality, avatars, wearables in the classroom, and finding a way to make sure that as those new technologies enter the classroom, we both take into account how we can make them accessible and take into account how we can leverage what may be inherent multimodality, inherent accessibility for those new technologies is important. And we have a comment in the chat which notes that PhET has an NSF grant to help make their simulations accessible, and that's absolutely right. And in fact, PhET is represented now in our diagram advisory committee, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we're really excited to be partnering with them again on accessibility for interactives. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've already been promoting the concept of Born Accessible, but as that little sort of journey through the digital classroom I just took suggests, there's a lot more to Born Accessible that we need to take into account. These rapid technological advances are absolutely critical for us to really delve into now before it becomes too late for us to make a difference. So, or rather, more difficult for us to make a difference. So there's another question in chat.
Yeah, I have posted the link if you want to follow along on the slides on your own computer. For anybody who didn't see that notification, you can access them to download if you go to https://goo.gl/imz as in zebra, M as in Mary, ZH. That's the shortened URL, and I will post it one more time.
Thank you. And for those of you who will be following along, I'm going to make sure to announce the slide I'm on periodically so that you know where we are in the deck. There's a question about whether the webinar will be captioned. Yes, we always caption before posting, so we'll definitely have that available. Okay, so I'm actually now on slide, now on slide 9. I wanted to give you all that context because that really lays the foundation for the Diagram Center story. And this is where I think we can talk a little bit about what the Diagram Center has already accomplished and then really focus again on where we're going to go from there and what the foundation allows us to build from there. So Diagram actually is an acronym. Many of you may not know that. It actually stands for Digital Image and Graphic Resources for Accessible Materials Center. That's the original expansion of the acronym. And it was funded in 2010 by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. And at the time, we were partnered with the U.S. Fund for DAISY and WGBH's National Center for Accessible Media. And as the name might suggest, the Diagram Center was initially focused very much on images and graphics. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we were looking at graphs, charts, diagrams, and in so much as they were expressed as images, math, and other symbolic notation. But really the Diagram Center, we started it as an R&D center with the idea that we would, convene an advisory group, which I think many of you have either been on, or seen function in an advisory group that would do the normal things an advisory group does: meet, advise, and occasionally provide some additional insights. But one of the things that quickly became apparent was that we had collected such an amazing group of people who were so passionate about this specific space of images and graphics that this was an opportunity for true collaboration. And so when I say I actually say the phrase diagram community as often as I say the phrase Diagram Center, because what became true is that the lifeblood of the Diagram Center as an R&D center was really this community that we formed, many of whom continue to participate as part of Diagram Plus, which again, we'll talk about the new structures for the community in a little bit. But I wanted to just underscore here that the success of the Diagram Center in its first few years was really due to this community. I'm getting another notice on chat about sound. It sounds like people are having difficulty hearing. When we do post this webinar, we will in fact have audio posted with it as well as the captioning, and I hope that if folks are still having difficulty getting audio, please do ping us within chat, and we'll try to resolve your questions specifically.
And make sure that you've dialed in. People tend to have better success if you call in with the phone instead of on a computer or with a headset. So I can post that number again as well.
Okay, so very quickly, what have we done together as a community since 2010? I invite you to take a look at the diagram website at diagramcenter.org, where you'll see a lot more detail on this. But I'm going to highlight a couple of areas of work that we've done. One of the first areas is in image description. So very often the path of the fastest way to make an image accessible and sort of the least resource-intensive way to make an image accessible is an image description. Now, we all know that image descriptions may not always be adequate and sometimes may not be necessary at all. But for those images that do benefit from description, providing both the tools and the guidelines to do that has been part of the critical work that we've done together. So for image descriptions, we have developed a tool called Poet, which is available through the Diagram Center website, freely available to allow people to add image descriptions to their EPUB books and their DAISY books. We've developed, again with our partners, an extensive set of image description guidelines, allowing you to get specific guidance on how to describe everything from a flow chart to a photograph. Our working group, our content working group, has created an accessible image sample book that includes not just description, but a variety of other methods to make images accessible, so that anybody who is in the business of creating content, whether you're an author or a teacher or a publisher, can look at the various ways an image can be made accessible. We have done work in 3D printing, tactiles, and haptics, and that's, as I mentioned in the accessible image sample book, those are things that we address, ways, technologies that people can use to make image content more accessible by creating different modalities for people to access those images. So we have a very active 3D printing working group, which has been putting together guidelines through their own testing and their own experience for how to create accessible 3D models. We have partnered to look at haptics on touchscreen devices, using haptic CSS to allow people to feel images based on haptic response. We've done a lot of work in accessible math. Again, partnerships with a variety of folks who work in both mainstream online math as well as specifically on accessible math. We've created a tool called MathML Cloud to allow publishers to automatically convert the math that they are working on, not just into an image that they can, a stylized image that they can actually put into a textbook that may only accommodate images, but also a description to accompany that image, an automatic transcription of the math, so that an accessible version is available. And then, of course, we continue to push Born Accessible publishing largely through standards work. And this is, again, where our partnership with George Kirscher and the U.S. Funder DAISY is critical. Working with groups like W3C, IDPF, and others, we created a framework for attaching alternate alternate formats of images to an image. It's called Diagrammer. And also created guidelines for publishers to apply standards, so technology standards, called our top tips for accessible EPUB 3. So, and that's just really highlights of the sort of fundamental work that we've done in those areas. We've also, of course, conducted research, and the research is more along the lines of surveying communities, surveying existing technologies, creating reports that give us a bird's eye view of, say, what the status is of interactive accessibility. What is the status of the use of screen readers? What's the status of the ability of 3D printers to create 2D tactiles? So there's a range of research that also, again, accomplished with with partners. All of this is available on the Diagram Center website. I encourage you to explore these various areas that we've worked on, and to give you sort of a taste again of the foundation that we're coming from. All right, so based on that, where are we now going? We now have an opportunity, thanks again to new funding from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, to expand the Diagram Center. And the new award that we received last fall is what we're now calling Diagram Center Plus. And we are once again partnered with the U.S. Fund for DAISY and George Kirscher, who lead our standards work. And the Diagram Center Plus takes advantage of a lot of things that we have, as I said, already built. A lot of the community, the infrastructure for the way our community works together, our working groups, a lot of those things have now, we can breathe new life into them with this new award. I'm now on slide 13, and I want to call your attention to that because this is really the slide where we talk about what the plus is in Diagram Center Plus. So yes, we're building on that foundation, but Diagram Center Plus has an even broader mandate than the original Diagram Center, which again was focused on images and graphics. The new mandate is beyond images and graphics. It really allows us to embrace something that as a community we have long said we wanted to do, which is multimodality, which is to say it's not about just one mode or replacing one mode with another mode in a sort of one-to-one relationship, but by saying sometimes students need to touch something, sometimes students need to see something, sometimes students need to hear something, sometimes students do some combination, sometimes students do one or the other. So to embrace multimodality fully, and a lot of our friends are deeply invest in universal design. I think we're in good company in embracing multimodality. That means that we get to look at some of those things that were toward the end of my quick technology overview. So things like video, things like VR. These give us an opportunity to explore new modalities on top of the ones that we're already interested in exploring. The other place where this work is really expanded is we're now stepping beyond the world of print disabilities and really looking at disabilities that are not traditionally associated with print disabilities, such as autism, hearing impairment, deafness, intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities, where we are interested in students with disabilities that may also be English language learners. So we're really expanding the scope of the communities and audiences that we're working with and the students that we want to help to really look at a broad spectrum of disabilities. This broadening of the mandate, of course, necessitates a broadening of our community because there is, of course, much expertise in each one of these fields that we have an opportunity to bring together to find both commonalities and differences so that we can optimize experiences for students. We're going to be doing more attention on early learning. And I'm going to mention a project later on during this talk, which I'm particularly excited about because it does address early learners in what I think is a fantastic way. But not just school age, but preschool and earlier. And the last thing that the last mandate that has really been expanded is to really grow our Born Accessible and something new we're calling bi-accessible outreach and integration. That means, so on the Born Accessible side, that means working very closely with publishers, getting more, putting more emphasis on tools and guidelines, et cetera, that they can use, and providing services to them that make that born accessible future possible. And again, we're partnering very closely with US Fund for DAISY on that project, and they have, and we have together been looking at providing things like a baseline for publishers to understand what it means to be accessible in their content, and finding tools to help them understand whether they've actually met the baseline. By accessible is really looking at people who and organizations who are buying content for students and helping them understand how to select for accessibility, how to what to look for, what to ask for. Really pairing the born accessible and buy accessible allows both the producers of the content and the purchasers of the content to really come together and have a common understanding. So the upshot of all of those really is 4 specific goals. And they're very, very high level, but as you can see, they're pretty straightforward. We would love for the work that we do as a community to result in, 1, more new educational materials that are born accessible. That's straightforward. 2, more use of new technology to create accessible educational materials, especially STEM. So where can we provide the tools and the know-how and the guidance and the best practices as a community to allow people to take advantage of new technology to create accessible educational materials? 3, more knowledge of the accessibility features specific to the needs of students with disabilities. So this is really about spreading the word as an R&D center about things that work, and spreading the word about new technologies that are specific to students who have specific needs. And finally, again, I want to emphasize that the 4th goal is the how we're going to get all that done, and that is through this nurturing, building, expanding the community of technology developers, publishers, end users, knowledgeable experts, many of whom are on this webinar today, to build the knowledge and contribute to the development of those tools, services, and to really exchange information with each other as well as with us. So it's a large mandate, but it is, I think, very much a natural extension of what Diagram has already done. We have already now convened the larger General Advisory Committee for Diagram Center Plus. We had our first convening earlier this month, and it brings together, as I say, a new cross-spectrum of people, including those who have been in the community for a long time, and then new members. So I have slide 16 is a high-level slide of just logos, just to give you a sense of the breadth of who's in the community. It is not comprehensive, and some of those logos I don't even expect you to necessarily recognize, and it's not meant to be a list. We will have a list of those members on the website. But just to give you a flavor, there are publishers such as Elsevier, there are groups such as the National Center for Learning Disabilities, representatives from Gallaudet, folks who are specific to math, such as folks from MathJax, ETS, the Rochester Institute of Technology, NFB, Pearson. So it's really a broad spectrum of people. All right, so let's talk about the nitty-gritty of the actual activities that we're going to undertake underneath Diagram Center Plus. We've broken up the activities into 4 categories so that we can talk about them in hopefully a sensible way, since there are many of them. the 4 categories are learn, prototype, launch, ignite. And each of them, I'm going to talk about each of them and then talk about the individual components beneath each of them. So now I'm on slide 18. And the first strategy we'll tackle is learning. So in learning, for us, that means that we are testing, identifying, and reviewing new ideas for making accessible content. So this is really about casting a wide net and being open to new technologies and really taking a look at what is on the horizon. There are some highlights from those activities are an explicit need to identify new technology for children with various disabilities. So again, as I mentioned, Diagram Center has in the past been focused on print disabilities, and now with the expansion of our mandate, we are hungry to know more about technology for children with other disabilities as well, and to incorporate our mutual understandings so that we can arrive at either new innovations or enhance existing innovations to make them that much more effective. We are going to be issuing, starting next year, an annual report that we'll call the Diagram Report, which will be a horizon report for the community, which will look at new technologies that we do identify and really look out ahead 3 or 5 years to make sure that we can not only be thinking about what can be done now, but thinking about how to set up our existing processes as a community and our existing work as a community to make sure that we are in a good place to address what comes in the future. We're also going to be testing and piloting more work for manipulatives and tactiles with the understanding that as a modality, having something to touch is often important for many different types of learners. And we have an opportunity to build on the work that we have already done in 3D printing to pilot new programs in classrooms to create and disseminate manipulatives and tactiles. And then finally, we've also put into our Learn strategy the work that we do in standards. Because there are so many applicable standards and because this is a really core part of the work that we do. And I should pause for a second and say that in this case, we are focusing largely on technology standards, technical standards. So that would be things like the standards that govern how content is displayed on the web, the standards that govern how a digital book is put together, the standards that govern how you may print or model a 3D object for a 3D printer. So it's those types of standards that are the core of the underlying, that are the core that underlies the technology that we need to leverage, that we want to help drive. As I said, George Kirscher from the U.S. Fund for DAISY and also of IDPF and W3C, FAME, is our lead in standards. We have a standards working group, and Charles LaPierre, who could not be with us today on this webinar, is our new technical lead for the Diagram Center, who is very active in various standards groups in order to make sure that accessibility is foremost in the minds of those groups as they move forward. Now, switching to slide 19. Now, once you've learned about something, your next step is often to prototype, which is to say, put your learning to good use by building something that displays what you've learned. So that's sort of a classic product life cycle step. So our next category of activities is really within this prototype, and this is where we build and test new technologies. The highlights here are to take steps to building something that has been long awaited by the original diagram community, which is a STEM image repository or registry. That is a repository, a collection of images, or registry, a collection of searchable metadata about images that exist elsewhere. A repository or registry of STEM images that are and have been made accessible. So that means here's an image of a heart that is, and here's the accompanying description, and oh, by the way, here's also an accompanying file that can be embossed, and here's a file that can be printed on a 3D printer, for example. So that is something that we're actively, we did some design work on, and will be as part of the original Diagram Center Plus, and we'll be actively starting to build. I mentioned earlier that I was excited about a project for early learners, and here it is. You'll see, for those of you looking at slide 19, a logo for PEEP and the Big Wide World, featuring 3 really adorable, if very simply drawn, little chicks. PEEP and the Big Wide World, those of you with small children may recognize as a science show for very young children, where PEEP and his buddies explore the world and learn things like observation and how to count and how to understand cause and effect. And PEEP and the Big Wide World is a project. It has been syndicated on PBS, is wildly popular among the preschool set. And we're very excited to be partnering with WGBH once again and the National Center for Accessible Media to use PEEP as a springboard for creating accessible video and curriculum for early learners. So that's a project that we'll start designing this year, and we'll get underway next year. We're also, the next area that we're doing prototyping is in math, and that is, it's one word here on the slide which belies just how deep our work in that goes. As I mentioned, we have a couple of tools already, MathML Cloud, for publishers to create accessible math, but also we just launched in March Math Support Finder, which is a way for people who need access to math and have certain combinations of assistive technology to determine whether their assistive technology can provide what they needed to provide. So Math Support Finder, again, if you go to the Diagram Center website, you can find a link to that and take a spin around. And it's a way for us to do 2 things. One is to acknowledge the complexity of accessing math accessibly, and then also leverage the community to provide answers to people who need to determine how they're going to get access to their math. That part of that acknowledgement of the complexity of accessing math accessibly means that we can also use this to identify gaps where that we might need to fill in order to make math more accessible for students. We're also going to undertake a sample code collection, which is a collection of the 25 or so most popular online interactions made accessible. And this is a project that we'll undertake beginning later this year, but will be ongoing throughout the life of Diagram, to really leverage, again, the technology community that we have to see if we can't create examples for people who need to, for instance, have an accessible video player or an accessible drag and drop interaction or an accessible slider interaction. Where can they find examples of these things? Where can they share examples that have worked and what hasn't worked? And that's where the sample code collection will come into play. We'll also be exploring the development of additional alternative modalities for images within Readium reading software. So Readium is an open source reading software, reading tool software that is being adopted very widely. And by providing some underlying technology to allow it to, for instance, give students the option of selecting when they encounter an image a short description, a long description, or a tactile file, is some features that we are at the moment trying to build into Readium. We'll also be looking at 3D authoring software. We'll be looking at integration of software that can help produce Braille and Nemeth Braille. So these are some of the, as I said, activity highlights within Prototype, and we'll use our work we'll use our work for the Diagram Horizon report and our, what we learned from our community in order to drive new and different activities in the prototype area in the further into the award we go. Okay. In the launch strategy, launch is where we're talking about that integration and implementation of our Born Accessible, Buy Accessible, and other tools and best practices, integrating and implementing them within the publishing and authoring community as well as within the education community and the technology community. So highlights of this are really, I think we've gone through them a little bit before. It's really outreach and production of the right tools and best practices for the various communities that are really involved in the life cycle of creating content, selling content, and then disseminating content. So that's publishers in most cases and authors, procurement offices, libraries, schools, parents. So again, trying to educate that entire chain and give them the tools they need in order to make accessible content truly available. And finally, our last strategy, which is Ignite, is again that all-important building and expansion of the community. And I mentioned a little bit earlier that we have not just an advisory committee, but also working groups. We've had, depending on the time during the cycle of the award, we've had between 4 and 7 active working groups at any given time in the lifetime of the previous diagram award, and we are now in the process of optimizing those groups for this next phase. We will also be doing more outreach to parents, and we are fortunate to be able to leverage some of the work that we've already done for parents with children of print disabilities through Bookshare, and then we'll be also looking to connect with parents of children with other disabilities as well. We do a lot of convening and collaboration. A lot of this community work doesn't just happen over email. It happens over the phone. It happens in person, and we will be announcing additional opportunities for people to convene, to collaborate, and also to participate in webinars like this. So those of you who are here probably have had some experience with other diagram webinars where we take deeper dives into specific new technologies or specific issues and have folks other than me talking about the work that they're doing. And finally, one of the things that we do for convening is collaborative code sprints, and for those developers in the call, a code sprint, is basically just where we roll up our sleeves and write some code. And we just came off a very successful code sprint looking at math specifically at the CSUN meeting in San Diego, where we had all, many of the leading lights of accessible math and participants from folks like Microsoft come and really delve into sort of the next things that we need to do for accessible math. So that was a lot, I realize. We have a lot on our plate, both from a mandate standpoint and also from an activity standpoint. I'm now on slide 22, which is what can you do? Hopefully we've said something in there that has excited you. Hopefully something in there made you go, oh, I really want to know more, or I really want to participate in that, or oh, I have an expert, or I am an expert who knows something about that, and you all really should get in touch with us. You can follow us on Twitter at DiagramC. You can subscribe to the newsletter or blog, which is something that comes out once every 2 months and is chock full of information, not only what we've done, but also things that we're hearing about and reading about in the community. You could join our working group, which are completely open. All you have to do is have the willingness and the drive to contribute, and we welcome people into the working groups. Contribute ideas, connect with us in some other way, just drop us a line. Diagramcenter.org, again, is the website, and you can contact us. There's a contact us page there, or you can email us directly at info@diagramcenter.org. So that is, in essence, the overview, and as I said, I realize that we covered a lot, so I'm just going to go ahead now and throw it open for questions.
I will unmute.
And I think there are some
The conference has been unmuted.
There are questions on chat if you wanted to.
Sure. So, yeah, we've got a few questions that came in over chat. One person wanted to know if we were aware of any research that tested the efficacy of image description.
That is a great question. And we have some research that was funded by NSF from the folks at WGBH, and I believe Rob Watt-Emerson, that is about video description. And then we have other work that is really, as you can imagine, small N kind of user testing. But I'm not aware of some large-scale study on image description. We do have, this is a big question that we often think about ourselves, and we have partnered with a couple of folks to seek funding to do this kind of research. So if you're a researcher out there and you know of research and or are interested in conducting that kind of research, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you. And then our next question was, how many publishers have bought into the Buy Accessible and Born Accessible, especially with post-secondary textbooks?
So it depends on what you define as buy-in. Publishers are, let's just say that they are beating on our doors to learn more about how they can be accessible. There are lots of different reasons for that, but they are super excited about the idea of getting help to be more accessible. How many of them have already implemented and how many of them can we say have a completely born accessible workflow? That's a tougher question. How many of them have come to us and said, help make our workflow make it more possible for us to have born accessible books? That's quite a few. So it's a long road, but we're very optimistic.
And our last question that came over through chat was if we have any suggestions for accessible scientific notation, such as the chemical bond diagrams that we showed on an earlier slide.
Great question. So chemical notation is exactly one of those areas that we are interested in exploring. So we have some very interesting work from a partner in the UK named Volker Sorge, who has created a prototype of being able to sonify chemical bonds. So we're looking at that work now, and to see, and he uses mole files. He starts with mole files, and we're looking at that work now to see if it can't be scaled. We've also partnered with, I should say, we're talking about partnering with some folks at UC Davis who are taking it one step beyond web versions of chemistry and are looking at 3D automating 3D printing of chemical models. So we'll make sure that you guys stay abreast of that.
We just had another question come in, which is that there's a lot going on in the K-12 and computer science. Obama's Computer Science for All initiative, for example. What is Diagram doing with computer science in K-12?
So we don't have anything active right now in computer science, but it has come up quite a bit more recently, especially given the initiative from the White House to really push computer science and coding as an activity for students. This is one of these places where I feel like we would love to hear from you about efforts that we should know about and how we might incorporate them into the work that we're doing. It's a great question.
That was all I had. Chat box, if anybody has any questions that you would like to ask, I invite you to.
Sorry. Can I throw one other thing out on the computer science question? It's not directly related. Well, it's slightly tangential, but I wanted to throw this out anyway because I think it's important. There is an initiative that's brewing in the Silicon Valley right now called Teaching Accessibility. And although it is not explicitly about making computer science accessible, it is about getting to universities who teach computer scientists. And someone's correcting me, I think they are now called Teach Access. It's about getting to universities who teach computer scientists, who teach developers, and making sure that the principles of accessibility and techniques.
Could you go back there and try that again, sister? We
accessible code are taught as a sort of basic skill for all developers. And conversely, to make sure that people who are hiring developers make sure that they are requiring accessibility knowledge as sort of baseline for all developers who come into their company. It's a really, really interesting initiative, and I think it couples well with the idea that not only does computer science need to be accessible for students with disabilities, but also anyone learning computer science.
Right?
To make their content, to need to understand how to make content accessible.
Thanks, Anne. So we're just about at time. If anybody has any last-minute questions, I invite you to go ahead and ask them or send them via chat.
And I'll encourage you, again, we have emails that are in the document, contact information and contact form in the Diagram Center website. Please do reach out. If there's something that you want to share with this group, let us know, because we'll be contacting all of you and of course contacting folks who registered but did not get a chance to come on today, with links to the slide deck, to a recording of the presentation, captions, and if there's something else that you want to share because it may answer a question someone has had better than I was able to answer it, please do share, and we'll make sure to communicate it out.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Once this has been posted, I will send out an email and let everybody know. And I just want to second Anne saying that we want to hear from you, so please feel free to email us. And also just thank Anne for being willing to talk more about Diagram Center Plus and presenting at this webinar.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.